Have you found yourself navigating a dark night of the soul? Are you craving a deeper connection with the divine feminine? Are you ready to integrate the balanced union of the masculine and feminine within? Then let's get started on the journey towards wholeness to reclaim your sovereign soul. My name is Cynthia Clark. Over the past several decades, I have undergone many dark nights of the soul. My healing journey has been a reclamation of my sovereign divinity. Whether you're just starting out on your self-healing journey or have been exploring techniques for many years, Discover Divinity offers an opportunity to uncover the new possibilities for discovering and reclaiming the innate wisdom within. It is time to discover the new possibilities. It is time to discover you. In today's Discover Divinity podcast, Reclaim Your Sovereign Soul, we are discussing all about dissolving the roots of shame and the journey back home to self. Today's guest, Tammy, shares the deconstruction of what she thought her individual worth meant versus what she has become and what she understands and believes. And it really was in that process of peeling back layers of shame and guilt that helped her come into a space of self-love and acceptance without condition, as well as, really coming into that space of love for herself, but also others. And then, as she did that, really recognizing those reoccurring patterns that weren't serving her and ways that she was able to shift and replace that. So let's get started on today's episode. Hello, everyone. Cynthia Clark here with Discover Divinity, and I am so happy that you are joining us today. Have we got an amazing podcast episode in store for you? And, just for the listeners that are tuning in, make sure that you go back and watch our beginning episodes because those give you a lot of context for Discover Divinity, what it's all about. The offerings that the Discover Divinity community has. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but you can go back and listen to a lot of foundational episodes that are going to launch into a lot of the really yummy content that we have coming up in the podcast. So as far as today's guest, I am super excited to introduce you to Tammy Joy Elsmore. And I wanted to get in a little bit of why I chose Tammy to join me in this space. She and I have really had this amazing connection, and I'm one of those people that believes that life really does happen for a reason. And I do believe that the people we meet, the experiences that we have, that there really are sometimes those stars that are just connected and why you meet or why you move forward in the journey of life together. And so a little bit about Tammy. She and I were actually in the same neighborhood, and we had a mutual church group that we were a part of. And I remember maybe one of the first times, Tammy, that you had presented yourself. And I just love that your middle name is Joy, because really the first time that I ever met you, because of who I am and the way that I read energy, that's part of my spiritual arena, my spiritual gifts. I always saw this light within you, and it really was that true essence, almost like a globe of light or a sunlight. And you really just exuded what your middle name is joy. And I'm pretty sure you probably talked about joy. Like I think you were presenting to a group of women, and that was the way that you presented yourself. And so it's been fun to be able to initially meet and then have these different segues of our life that have brought us together and where we're at now.
Oh
Yeah. So,
no.
so if you want to maybe expand a little bit on maybe some of those parts that connect us, and
Yeah.
then after that, we'll jump into your story and all of the great content that we're going to cover today.
Well, it's so funny that you talk about like that, the gifts that you have, because I remember meeting you, and one of the first things I felt about you was safety. Like there was a peace and a safety as a female to a female, I guess you could say at the time, that I was very drawn to. And then and I don't fully remember. I do remember speaking to a group of women. I don't remember exactly when it was, but I do remember over the years speaking about joy, so I'm not shocked. My mom always tells a funny story about why I had my middle name. And so I think I've always just enjoyed living up to that. So I
Mm-hmm.
probably was talking about joy at that time. But I remember meeting you and just feeling very safe, very trusted. And then later on, when you and I started to do some work together, you were helping me. And I remember a very distinct experience I had with you. In fact, it's the only experience that I've had where I was kind of in a hypnotic state. I was very relaxed. And I remember laying on my couch. And I don't even remember what we were talking about, but you were helping me work through some things. And I remember gasping because I felt my grandmother's presence, and her smell overtook me. And it was literally pure joy in that moment. And I have never forgotten that experience because it really helped me, one, connect you and I together. I knew what you were doing was very helpful to me. I knew the work you were doing was very important, but I was a recipient of that work.
Thank you.
And
Yeah.
so we got to have that great experience. But then I think, as things happened in life and my journey started to unfold, um, we didn't see each other, and I moved, and I was working through things. And then we ran into each other at, I think it was, you said was the piano gallery. I think I was like at the piano store, shockingly,
Mm-hmm.
finding some piano music.
Which is another one of our connections because we're both pianists, and
Yes.
we'll definitely talk a little bit about that. So yeah.
But that's where it seems like in life, especially at those moments where needed, we
Mm-hmm.
end up connecting back with each other. And then,
Mm-hmm.
of course, the beauty of social media has been able to give us the opportunity to follow each other and to connect and to stay in contact with each other's lives. And so, for that, I'm very thankful because that's what I think has also helped us to stay connected.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love that in those moments, especially as I watched you evolve from your journey, you're going to share with the audience today a lot more in-depth parts of that. And so I'm going to let us get to that point in a minute. But, for me, like what I really, really appreciated that in all those stages that we would connect, or maybe we'd say hi on social media, or maybe we'd run into each other when you were in town. I saw that the constant of that light and that joy and your true innate gift of what you offer the planet. And even though things were incredibly hard, like I always saw that constant that kept you so grounded to the tenacity, the resilience, all of these parts of yourself that you've had to go through to get to where you're at now. And that's why I love what we're going to dive into. And I guess I kind of jumped right into how we know each other. And I'm like, I don't want to jump fully into your story yet because I think something that you do need to know about Tammy is, us being at the piano store together. Like that definitely connects us both as musicians. But really, I was asking Tammy to share with me like what brings you like this true joy, your true passion, your true happiness. And when you said that, the first thing that came out of your mouth was nature. And then you're like, of course people, and then music. And so what I loved about that was was your ability to have that love, like that deep love and connection, because that's who you are. Your light is so influential that part of that gift is connecting with others, spending that wonderful quality time so that they can enjoy your light. But then also, what's beautiful in your extroversion is you've also found that peace and that safety and that renewal, especially in the unraveling of what your story is, to be able to come back into that grounded, innate connection of stillness and the wisdom that lies within. And so, not only through nature, but then also music and maybe sitting down,
Yes.
playing the piano.
And
And so,
letting it flow. Isn't that the truth?
yes. And so,
Yeah.
I'm just going to let you like merge into how you want to go from these passions. And then I would love to kind of like dovetail into the first question that I have for you. So, anything that you want to say about that, and then we'll get into our first
Well,
part.
what I think is interesting is that a lot of the passions or the things that I think that bring me joy, I didn't always recognize brought me joy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a part of my unraveling process and just learning to heal from things that have happened in life is giving myself permission to feel joy in those things and
Mm-hmm.
to actually stop and pause and be like, oh, wow, being out on the water kayaking actually brings me feelings. Like it was about
Mm-hmm.
connecting to our feelings. Like it brings me feelings of joy and contentment. Like I want to do this again.
Yes.
Or it was the same thing sitting at the piano and writing music. And I
Mm-hmm.
didn't always have that gift. I was one that was a sight reader. I was classically trained on the piano. I didn't have that creative side to just like have the melodies that were stirring around in my head come out my fingers. And I had to be determined, like, I know this is in me somewhere. And I just kind of let it flow. And the more that I practiced and the more that I got in touch with, like, actually my own inner self, the more I was able to create and love, like, deeply love music. It's a
Wow.
huge part of my life and something that brings me like tremendous joy.
Wow. And I love how this kind of really is a symbol of your actual journey, right? Like the structure, like we both took piano lessons when we were little, right? It was very
Structured, and
methodical,
this is how
structured. You
it
got
is.
to be
Yeah.
this way, right? And then to realize, okay, you got to do it this way. You've got to focus in on the exact tempo and the appropriate, symbols and frequencies that come with piano, and then to finally just say, with a deep breath, I can actually have a little bit of fun with this. I can let go of the rigidity and I can lean
Wow.
into that inner
That is beautiful.
creativity is, I really think, like the symbol of where you're going to go with your whole entire journey. That is just
That's so
fascinating.
beautiful, Cynthia, because to be honest with you, like now that you're saying that out loud,
Mm-hmm.
that's so great because music, I'm just thinking, off the cuff here, there is a rigidness to anything, not just music, but a process, I could say.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that we follow when we're taught. And when I was teaching piano, I remember my easiest students were the ones that were just rule followers.
Yeah.
But the ones that their parents would come to me and be like, Tammy, I can't get my kids to, or my, my child to stick with what you've written down. And
Mm-hmm.
actually, it was in the challenging of that process of those types of students that actually helped me to develop a new part of my brain to
Yes.
teach. And that fundamentally also helped me to be like, oh, if I can be okay with them unlocking that creativity, why can't I unlock it in my own self?
Oh my gosh. So like that's so beautiful. And I relate on so many levels because I've also been a piano teacher. And when I finally like just came into this space where I was reading the child's energy, and because we have been so structured in our school systems, in society, in religious constructs, and familial constructs, that we have to show up and be a little cookie cutter uh, imprint of
Yes.
what that construct and ideology expects. And so when I was finally able to just lean in and really just know who I was sitting with and to feel who they were, there were not the exact same things that I was teaching for each student. I had to ebb and flow
To
with their
customize it.
energy, and I had to tap into their creativity
Yes.
so that it was a joyful, fun experience and not just that methodical structure. And that is when my students were
Flourish.
almost like freed. They were
Yeah.
freed out of this little cage that they were constructed in, and it
Mhm.
was exciting for them to come into the piano room or to be able to see their progress because it wasn't just all this cut and dry
Yeah. Well,
experience.
and I
So,
think that there's a place for structure. And if
mm-hmm,
we were to compare that to life, we do need a foundational structure.
mm-hmm,
But I completely agree with you because I would do, and isn't it funny that how you talk about like you're getting into the feelings with your students? Because I accomplished that same task with my students, but in a
mm-hmm,
different way.
mm-hmm,
I would all of a sudden, like, for example, I would find a lot with my boys, like not my particular boys, but boys in general, that they got to a certain age and they tuned out piano. Like, so
mm-hmm,
my challenge as a piano teacher would be like, how am I going to adjust things for them? And so then I'd be like,
mm-hmm,
wait, I don't have to teach them out of a book. I can teach the same concepts in
mm-hmm.
one piece of music. Let's use Harry Potter, and
Cool.
they love it. So I could
Mm-hmm,
teach them about timing, and I could teach them about the various types of music and things that were necessary and needed to be taught,
mm-hmm,
but I could do it with something. And I think if we compare that to life, we can have the recognition that we need structure,
mm-hmm,
but that just like what you said, it's so important that we actually give ourselves permission first to tailor things that are necessary for our own growth in life,
mm-hmm,
to tailor it to not have to fit into a cookie cutter mold. And that the more that and I would say with anybody, the more that we're stuck in that mold and that we keep our own selves in that, I would say, box,
mm-hmm,
the more restricted, constricted even I felt as an individual.
mm-hmm.
But
Absolutely.
yet stepping outside of that was the scariest thing in the whole world.
Oh,
So scary.
absolutely. And I love what you're saying because I really think this is going to kind of bring us into the different subjects that we want to address. And when we do start to identify these different structures, right, that we have had the cookie cutter expectations, right? I believe like initially when we moved into a more I'm going to say it because I have an episode that will really dive in and go into the historical context of um, the history of patriarchy, the aspects of, benefits, the historical um, removal of the divine feminine, like all of these aspects. And so we don't have to like get into all those details, but feel free to share whatever you desire that applies. But this is what's happened in our society is we have become so structured that it's moved into what is a beautiful, very balanced masculine energy, which is structure.
Mhm.
And it's pushed us into a shame based perfectionism. And it has taken away that feminine touch to our functioning as humans. And the result is a lot of these shame based belief systems that create self hatred, that create all kinds of
Yeah.
nervous system disorders, that create health conditions because people are just endlessly running on a hamster wheel to try to reach a destination and
That you
they
feel like you're
never,
never going to get
you
there.
don't ever
Yes,
reach it.
it's
And
so
so
true.
this is like so important for us to like really go, okay, this is what's happening because most people that are in, it's kind of like a square peg in a round hole.
Round hole.
Or it's the cookie cutter analogy, or it's being inside of a box, right? And and when you're so confined into living according to other people's um, belief systems or realities, especially when they're laced with shame, we lose the spirit of authenticity. And so, yes, you were saying this is not an easy feat. It
Yep.
is not an easy feat when you end up realizing that maybe in a room full of circles and squares, perhaps that you're actually a star,
Yeah.
right? Or you're actually a rectangle
So
and you
true.
just don't fit in.
And yet we're all shapes and we're all
Yes.
needed. And we
Yes.
all have a unique.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to touch on the fact that I think that one of the things that are we believe is that structure brings safety.
Mm-hmm.
If we have structure, if we have routine, let's just use that there's safety in that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where stepping out of that is the scariest thing in the world, because all of a sudden, what's the opposite of safety?
Yes.
And then all of
Mm-hmm.
a sudden now you're like left in the most vulnerable state, and it causes anxiety. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
we all know that once you start to feel that anxiety, there's physical things that go along with that as you try to
Mm-hmm.
like gather yourself. And along with that anxiety comes shame. And to be
Mm-hmm.
honest with you, I think as we deconstruct ourselves and as we um, have to re-look at ourselves and who we are because of the experiences that we've gone through, um, you go through a point where you don't even know who you are. It's like you feel like you're talking about a third person and not yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like I remember having experiences as I was like trying to figure out as I had left my religion and as I was shifting in my value system, not necessarily my core values of things that meant the most to me, but just shifting in my belief system. Um, I remember like feeling like when someone would talk to me, I didn't know how to answer because it was like I was talking about somebody else. I didn't know what I
Mm-hmm.
liked. I didn't know what I was made up of. I didn't know what I believed. I didn't know. I felt so out of body.
Mm-hmm.
And I really was. That was a part of the recognizing that what I was living was not serving me well.
Mm-hmm.
It was causing me harm. I think at points I was causing others harm because of my choices and how it led me to certain things. And I think there was a lot of shame base around that.
Mm-hmm.
I was taught that certain behaviors needed to be hidden and
Yeah.
that my worth was tied to certain behaviors. And so that whole process, all of a sudden we talk about a deconstruction,
Mm-hmm.
that's the fact that when you are removing structure, it no
Mm-hmm.
longer feels safe. It feels 100% chaotic. And it's
Right.
like you're out floating into this space and you have no control where you're going to land. You're just in limbo. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a constant state of limbo until you can slowly, piece by piece, start to ground yourself in something that you can rely upon.
Yeah.
And I feel like, so when we talk about structure, that's where it equals that safety. We all just assume that
Mm-hmm.
whatever the structure we've been given in life, that brings us safety, not recognizing that within our own selves, we can create safety, and it doesn't have to look like the cookie cutter that we talk about. It can
Yes.
look so differently.
Right. And when I think of like a field of flowers, like yes, it's beautiful to have a field of daisies. Like wow, how magnificent. But the world filled with daisies and roses and lilies and sunflowers and all these magnificent flavors, this is what makes our world beautiful.
Yeah.
And when we can truly step into going, you know what, I don't have to be a daisy. Like I've got all these other leaves. I have this different center that smells differently than this core center. And and the flavors, the looks, the colors are all different. And that really is comes back to the authenticity. Then okay,
Authenticity.
thank you. Thank you. So authenticity, right? And so I think that that also really kind of pulls into like that first question, right? Is
Mhm.
about deconstruction. And when you finally had to go through what is deconstructing, right? I think, you know, I've taught courses before, and I recently taught a class on this process that we go through as individuals, and it's not always rainbow and roses, right? Sometimes we have to go through the great shaking, we have to go through the great rumbling, we go through what is that initial um, ground breaking movement in our lives, something that happens that then can happen in a sequence of events or experiences that then break us open and cause us to fall into a black hole of sorts. I call it the void, where you just feel like you're free falling into nothingness, because it is when you move out of that so-called false illusion of security and safety that you're really pushed to go, okay, who am I, and what does that mean? And so when we were talking prior, you had mentioned something about individual worth, right? And what you were taught about what it meant to be worthy, right? Like you're being told you have to do all of these things in order to be worthy or to be enough. And now being able to go into maybe a little bit, maybe that's two questions in one, but when we talk about the breaking apart, the crumbling, the void, even that dark night of the soul, because in Discover Divinity, you know, even part of a lot of the themes that I focus on have to do with that dark night of the soul. They have to do with the shadow. And so you're crumbling, right? This breaking piece that then opens you up to go, wow, maybe that identity was just the illusion, right? Of what others thought I should be. And then how did you get to that point of what you believe about your own individual worth today? And like, I'm going to let you take it from here because I know you
Yeah.
have lots to share.
I have to be able to honor that when I was young, or when I was raising my children, and when I was married,
Mm-hmm.
those structures, or that worth that I had, I believe was real for that time frame.
Mm-hmm.
It was real to the extent of what I knew. I was only as real as what I the knowledge and the wisdom that I had at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have to give myself permission to say, you did the best that you could during those times of your life,
Mm-hmm.
whether it was raising my children, whether it was in my marriage, whether it was growing up with what I was experiencing and what my limited knowledge was.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that my my deconstruction process actually started well before I left the church, when you and I were in the same religion at that time. It was
Mm-hmm.
probably back in 2017, 18. My deconstruction, I started to question some things, and even my own worth, as I was working for the church.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have students that would come into my office, and they would be just devastated. And I would, ask them, what's wrong? What's wrong? And they would be so upset because they felt that they were misfits, or they were different. And when I would get to the reason to why, and then they would tie that to their own worth.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to really question my own self. I'm like, well, wait a minute. How is this affecting me? And like how I believe, because when I was growing up, I was always taught that, if you were promiscuous, if you did these things, you were less. Everything
Mm-hmm.
was about being less than. I never realized that my worth was not ever tied to an experience. That's what I believed it was.
Mm-hmm.
My worth, I would probably say most of my life it was tied to if and then statements. And
Mm-hmm.
so I started to realize that I would hear the same thing from seminary students, that if I just feel the spirit this way, then, and then
Mm-hmm.
it would be this. If I don't do this, then, or if I do this, then, and it
Mm-hmm.
was always tied. And so there was a condition placed upon this. And I
Mm-hmm.
could relate to that. I was like, this is how I'm feeling.
Mm-hmm.
I'm feeling like as long as I have an if then statement and if I serve enough, if I bear my testimony enough and actually say these things,
Mm-hmm.
or if I don't make a mistake, or if I forgive this many times, I will be a better person, or I will feel better. But yet there was a yearning deep inside where I was really just not comfortable with who I was. And I never could actually put words to it. It was always this feeling. And when I would get the feeling, it was actually a shudder within my body, and it hurt actually
Mm-hmm.
and I couldn't quite put or even describe it to someone, but I knew that I was having these stirrings back in 2013, 14. And when I divorced the first time, I really recognized that, oh my gosh, I remember tying my worth to, like, I'm a horrible person.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to take that negative dialogue, and I was believing my own negative bias, and I was telling myself these narratives. And then all of these things that I had been taught must be true. Like, there's
Mm-hmm.
no way that I'm a human being having a human experience and that it's okay for me to own all the weak sides and the positive sides and the strengths. And there's no way. And I started to have this um, slow deterioration of my own self. And here I was still trying to raise kids, and then I decided, with my ex-husband, we're going to put our marriage back together, and that didn't work because I also was at a place where I was no longer buying into things that I was being taught.
Mm-hmm.
And but it wasn't even just what I was being taught, it was how I was being treated. I no longer fit into this box. One, I
Mm-hmm.
was a single divorced mom. And so that in and of itself brought a tremendous amount of shame.
Mm-hmm.
There's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
And I started to kind of struggle through that. Then, when I felt like we were going to be able to put our marriage back together, then all of a sudden it was like, okay, if I continue to do these things, then. And I started to still have those if and then statements. And I was having these unravelings inside myself of what is going on. There is something wrong with you.
Mm-hmm.
And I could feel myself shifting, and
Mm-hmm.
I was shifting from myself spiritually and physically. My mental health was starting to suffer. I didn't understand what was going on. Then my marriage was still struggling. And I can look back now and say, it's because we were both deconstructing, in
Mm-hmm.
different ways. And I didn't know how to get through this. And so I started to sink deeper and deeper. And then you get to a point in about 2018 when my
Mm-hmm.
marriage finally ended, where I said, um, something, I got to figure this out. I felt like I didn't have a value system. I felt like I had no friends. I felt that I let my children down. There was a tremendous amount of guilt and shame. And then I started to nourish those thoughts. And the more I nourished that negative side, the further away I started to go from who I was. And I found myself in a very dark place where I didn't even feel like I was worthy enough to take up space in
Mm-hmm.
the world. And I started to just be like, you know what? My kids deserve a better mom. She makes
Wow.
mistakes. I don't deserve to be loved.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to realize that my foundation from my religion, I did not believe that. I did not believe that my values should ever be placed on mistakes that I made. They should
Mm-hmm.
not be based on a value of what my belief was if it was different than somebody else's.
Mm-hmm.
And I found myself recognizing that, wait a minute, there is nobody that is going to fix this but me. I'm going to have to do some dark soul searching work. I'm going to have to recognize that it's okay that I let go of these belief systems, that I can still own and honor all the experiences that have happened, all the mistreatment, all the lies, all that were told
Mm-hmm.
about me, the lies I told myself, the negative narratives that I told myself. I need to recognize that all of this is stunting my growth. I need to figure out who I am. I need to
Mm-hmm.
figure out if it's really real that my worth is tied to an organization. I need to
Mm-hmm.
know if that's real.
Yeah.
And as I started to like do some deep meditation, that's actually when I found my love of being outside. I would
Mm-hmm.
go out and kayak for hours on the water, and I would feel so free and I would feel so connected to myself. And I
Mm-hmm.
would just think, and I would start to realize, wait a minute, like your core of who you are is kindness. Your
Mm-hmm.
core is love. Am I making mistakes? Am I like trying to figure out what things mean to me now, like as far as my belief system in a spirituality, into a being? Yeah. And then I gave myself permission through all of this chaos to just be okay, not knowing,
Mm-hmm.
that it was okay to
Yeah.
say, I don't know.
And that is probably, I think, the scariest part of moving into that free fall, right? Because you did hit the dark night of the soul. You did hit that space of, what I guess people would call depression, but it's so much more than that. Like it's a dark pit of energy, right? Like where you're just in this space of going, "Oh my gosh, I don't know anything." And when you finally come into that space as you sit with the darkness, this is what so many people are so afraid to
To
do,
do
is
is
to
so true.
sit with all of the yuck, all of the things, all of the scary. But that really is what is the propelling factor, right? This, after you crumbled, after you broke apart, you came into like such a deep self-hatred for you.
Oh, it was awful.
Yeah, it started to wake you up into this space of going, where is this coming from? Because this, I
Yes.
it's like an inner part of you, that it is that resilience, it is that part of you that says, today I'm choosing to show up for myself. And you start to have these little peepholes of
Of
light,
light.
right? Where
Yes,
you're
that's
like, oh,
exactly what it was
which
like.
it sounds like that's what nature started to do for you, and really your connection to creation, for you to really vibe and tune into that stillness that then could energetically keep you in a calm, still place, even though you were toiling with the storm. But gradually, you were coming to this space of self discovery, right? Of learning what self love and acceptance without condition could look like.
Well, and not only that, I started to very slowly, because I had lost all ounce of confidence in myself, like I couldn't make a decision. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
it just didn't, it just, I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do, and I didn't know who to talk to about it. And so I kept all of this inside, and I was like, I'll figure this out eventually. And it's true, we actually do have the answers within ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But when we manifest, that's why it's so important to talk. That's why it's so important
Mm-hmm.
to share, because it connects us with other human beings,
Mm-hmm.
and it draws us because we learn from them, they learn from us, and it's just this beautiful cycle. But I
Mm-hmm.
learned that over time, that and through this whole process, I was losing relationships, whether it
Mm-hmm.
was with my children, whether it was with my family and my siblings, people that I thought were my friends inside my religion. And
Mm-hmm.
later people came to me, like after I left the church, first of all, they were shocked because um, it's like, whoa, she worked for the church. She's leaving the church of all people.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really hard for a lot of people. But then at the same time, when I finally was able to own that part of myself and say, yes, this served a purpose for this time, but whoa, there's been a lot of shit that's happened in between here
Mm-hmm.
that, and some of it is really painful to still talk about. And so, I still hold some of that sacred, out of respect for others. But there was a
Mm-hmm.
lot of deconstructing of my worth because of my marriage and some of the things that I experienced, and that I always felt my worth was tied to certain things. Well, when all of a sudden you remove all of that and you're like metaphorically naked, and you
Mm-hmm.
just have to figure out what piece of clothing you want to put back on, I became very purposeful in what I chose to put back on and
Mm-hmm.
how I put it back on. And it
Yeah.
pissed off a lot of people.
Yeah.
A lot of people were unhappy with that. And you find that as you deconstruct.
Absolutely. And you absolutely, only because I know other parts of this story, and I think, wow, like for you have gone through what you did on the level that you did from all corners and to be where you're at today, like that's what I call true resilience. And that is what I
Well, you're
call
very kind.
really, and it doesn't feel pretty. And you think, well, you just don't even know half the story of how I got there. I mean, believe me, I've gone through my own stuff, and that's a whole other podcast. But like really, when you go back to like that true core essence of who you are, like that was your plug-in. Like that's what kept you going through all of this, no matter how dark it got, no matter how much judgment or rejection or false projections of how you should be or how you should act came towards you, you still had that bravery, you had that courage to be able to stand up for yourself and your own self-worth.
And I
It,
actually really appreciate you saying that, because there were many, many years where I did not feel resilient or
mm-hmm.
brave. I felt like a coward. I felt weak,
Wow.
and I felt like, I let people down. I felt like I let
Mm-hmm.
my family down, my own self down. And I
Mm-hmm.
started to realize that one day it kind of clicked for me when I was thinking about how, when I learned to allow myself to just be with who I was and to own all parts of myself,
Mm-hmm.
the good, the bad, and the ugly, when I owned all of it
Mm-hmm.
and I decided to just love myself for whatever it was that Tammy was. It didn't matter whether it was, I was swearing like a sailor, or I decided to
Mm-hmm.
go out and have a drink, or I decided to, keep parts of myself as I was deconstructing and reconstructing. Service was still a huge part of me. I still loved people. I wanted to serve. I found a lot of joy in,
Mm-hmm.
seeing other people happy. I realized that I was not honoring that and offering that to myself. And I had to ask myself some really hard questions of what made me think that I wasn't worthy of the
Mm-hmm.
same love and kindness that I wanted to extend to others. What
Yes.
what was it that was standing in my way? How could I really love somebody else if I didn't even know what that self-love felt like?
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of started an awakening within
Mm-hmm.
myself of being able to say, wait, I am as worthy as the next person for
Mm-hmm.
kindness and grace and love. And that all of these experiences that I've had have given me wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to shift. And even though I always felt that I was a positive person, there were some really depth, like lay on the floor, curled up in a ball, sobbing
Mm-hmm.
because I did not understand myself, or I just wanted it to go away because I didn't know what to do. And you know how we talk about that structure brings safety. When your structure is blown right
Mm-hmm.
open and you're revisiting it and not understanding like what you even believe, or what you believe self-worth is, you're grasping at things that you feel like are unattainable.
Yeah.
And you can't, you're just kind of like what you talked about, that darkness where, and I felt floating. I felt like I didn't have any kind of solid grounding. And but then over time, the more that I learned to give myself grace and love myself for exactly where I was, the more I realized I had more to offer. The more
Mm-hmm.
I realized that, well, wait a minute, the core values that I've always had, um, beyond a religion or beyond anything, still existed inside me. I had just forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot what it felt like to feel joy as like a child when I was
Mm-hmm.
carefree. And I started to go back and give my young self permission. I gave myself, as a young mother, permission to have loved myself in the capacity that I could. And I gave myself permission to love myself and all the mistakes that I made in my marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And I gave myself permission to love my talents and my gifts, and I stopped allowing others to put
Mm-hmm.
those confines on me, because the more that I allowed the influence of others within me, the more that I felt like I had to meet a certain expectation.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to meet anybody's expectations but my own.
Yes. And that's so powerful. When you finally put yourself back in the driver's seat, because we have been conditioned with something that is so innately ours. It is our sovereign birthright.
Yes.
It is our core essence. And we come into a world and a planet and ideologies that constantly teach us to deny that inner voice if it does not match the
What somebody
ideologies
else,
outside
yes,
of you.
better told us.
And
So
so no
true.
wonder we lose that connection to our inner knowing, our own intuition. It's because of the conditions, it's the conditional love, and it's those perspectives of shame. And that's what I try to tell my clients, because as many that I have worked with, whether they have been in full religious constructs or maybe they're people that have tried to deconstruct and they've left religion, I've worked with all kinds of clients. No matter what, they all have this deep programming of shame. And in the studies that I've done about shame, like if I could have my audience walk away with one empowering tool at least about shame, is in the studies that we have done, shame is not of God, right? If God is your plug-in source, right? Shame is actually a man-made energy. It's not even something that humans are designed to feel on their own. It's something that other people project on an individual. It's not something we're innately designed to
To
experience.
experience.
Yes, it's
Yes.
someone else
Projecting that
projecting
onto us.
onto you, and
Yes.
it has nothing, it is not your core
Oh, I
essence.
couldn't agree with you more. And you
And
know what? I think that we go back in time, because I've been able to go back and identify
mm-hmm,
moments that I felt shame, what it
mm-hmm,
felt like for the need to hide.
mm-hmm,
And I can go back as a young girl and identify that. And if it's not corrected, or if we
mm-hmm,
do not have the opportunities for someone to teach us, then we will grow up with those patterns of shame, and
mm-hmm,
we will grow up with the um, thinking that we have to hide. But then we can go even deeper and think, well, what is it about that act, no matter what it is, that makes us feel like we have to hide? And that in and of itself is because we've been placed into a box that something has to be shameful
mm-hmm.
according to someone else, and
Yes,
according to whatever it is that we're being indoctrinated by. And I
yes,
had to learn that no, that absolutely, like you said, is not a, I think that there's a big difference between guilt and shame.
yes,
I
hugely.
think, I really truly believe that guilt causes us to recognize something is out of balance and to want to
Mm-hmm.
have an action to fix, so
Correct.
there's a different result.
Yes.
Shame wants us to hide. Shame is attached to self.
Yeah.
It makes us go inward instead of outward.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
that's part of my deconstruction, was being okay, recognizing that I don't have to feel shame.
Yes.
And I don't
And
want
yeah,
others
this is
to feel
huge.
shame. It's
Yes.
huge.
And if I can just point out one little part of that because we're on the same page. You know, if you think about maybe a little child who hits their sibling, right? When you're sitting down, you're having a conversation with that child. You're talking to that child and saying, when you hit your sibling, that hurts. How do you think that would feel if you got punched in the arm, right? We have conversations that go, oh, wow, I don't want to hit my brother or sister. And then you're able to be in that space of that layer of guilt that's just going, wow, I want to make that better. I want to change that. But what happens is when we have the projections from outside us that move us into shame, that say, you're a bad little boy, you're a bad little girl. And we've had that whole entire construct that now creates thoughts of, I'm not good
Not
enough.
worthy.
I'm not
Yes.
worthy. I am bad. I hate myself because of dot, dot, dot. And we're buying into the whole entire Santa Claus illusion, which says you better be good for goodness
Mhm.
sake. And if you aren't good, then you're
Then
going to
you're on the
be,
naughty list.
yes, you're on the naughty list and you have
Yeah,
coal coming to you, right?
right.
And then if you're good, then you get a bunch of presents and we all get to pat you on the head. So we're programmed from a very young age to have this shame be projected onto us, and then we buy in to the shame illusion, and it's an illusion. And so if anyone could walk away now, if you've had thoughts, I hate myself, I am a bad person, I'm unworthy, I'm not enough, man, dot 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 dot, and you are loathing in what Tammy was talking about earlier. She was watering those weeds in her
Oh,
garden,
they were
right?
huge. I would look
Yeah.
at those weeds and I'm like, somebody's got to get a weed whacker and help me get these down
Yeah,
because I
well,
was
and we
difficult to get
don't we don't
out.
know how, right? And so
Yes.
this is what I'm so passionate about, is being able to help individuals go, if I'm having shame-based thoughts, I know instantaneously that is complete
False.
bull, right? Like
Yes.
complete bull. You take that and you instantaneously put it in a trash can and you light that thing on fire. And
Yeah.
you have to start to change your brain and saying, no, I do not choose this. And as true as it may feel, because the brain's going to give you every reason, just like your brain did, it gave you every reason why it could say, oh, I'm a bad mom, or I'm a bad wife, or I'm not living this way, or I'm not doing this. It's going to keep perpetuating that. And until you can kind of come into this space that you did, this awakening, where you kind of went back into the driver's seat, you started to recognize the illusion of shame
Oh my gosh, that
and you
is so
claimed it
true.
back, right? Like that's what I think is so powerful about your story, is you're finally coming back into your innate wisdom.
And can I tell you that the coming into that has brought more peace into my own
Mm-hmm.
individual life? But yet, as I have created peace, there are still those around me that are unsettled. There
Oh, of
are still
course.
those around me that have the illusion that they need to still save me, as if there's something like, it's that if then statements theory again. Oh
Yes.
my gosh, if we can just reach her. And I feel so comfortable now saying, actually, no, I am more at peace with who I am, what I
Mm-hmm.
believe, what I know about myself than I have ever been. It doesn't mean that I still don't make very human mistakes. It doesn't mean that
Right.
I don't falter and that I still don't have patterns in life that I have to work on. But the thing is that's different as I have come through, I would say, the other side, is that I really am comfortable with where I'm at in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't always mean my life as in my surrounding, but I mean my life as within myself.
Mm-hmm.
Like I am okay with who I am. I probably love deeper now individuals, just people, than I have ever loved. And the reason I feel like I deeply love others is one, I can relate more to them when you go through just sheer darkness and then
Mm-hmm.
you finally start to see, like you talk about, those pinholes of light.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't have conditions placed upon it. Like, I'm going to love this person and hopefully they're going to bring their children to church.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully there is no expectation. Everybody is given this love. That is the one thing about love, is that the feeling and the concept of love does not have limits. It
Mm-hmm.
does not have conditions. Love is not conditional. And we have
Yes.
to remember that. And I made the mistake, like any mom. I probably, with my kids, I guarantee you, if you were to sit down with all four of my kids, they would give you a laundry list of
Right.
everything that their mom has done. I am sure of it. And I am sure that at times, in my limited knowledge, I am sure that there were times where they felt that my love was conditioned on this or that.
Yeah, of course.
And but now I recognize love so differently, and I feel so okay with who I am. Even
Yeah.
on my most hot mess days, I don't
Mm-hmm.
care.
Yeah.
I'm okay because I know that I have a core side of me. I know who I am. I know that I'm okay with who I am, regardless of what anybody else feels that I needed to
Yes.
be. I'm
Yeah.
okay with that center. And the more that I was okay with that, the more I was okay with others.
Yes.
The more that I was like, ooh, tell me your story. Let me connect with you. Let me empathize and love you.
Mm-hmm.
Let me help you know. Let me be your cheerleader. Because
Yeah.
there were some really dark times where I didn't feel like I had a cheerleader. In fact, I felt so judged.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to be my champion for my own self.
Yeah.
And I had to recognize that there wasn't anybody else that was going to help me through this but me
Mm-hmm.
at times. I had to do the work. I had to learn to love myself and accept myself for exactly who I was, all facets of myself.
Yes. Absolutely. And so, as you've been speaking, like I love to hear how, you went through that crumbling. It broke you open. You went into a full dark night of the soul. And I laugh because I'm like, oh, I'm like, let me tell you about that because it's not a fun place to be, but it was in, these patterns. Like you started to recognize I'm watering the weeds.
Yeah.
Like this is something destructive that I
Yes.
am doing to
To
myself.
myself.
And that, like, the next question that I wanted to ask you about were about these reoccurring patterns that weren't
Yeah.
serving you, that you had to shift and replace. And I feel like you've identified that and going, I had to first recognize where my brain was and what I was buying into. And once you realized that shame was an illusion, and then you started to recognize all of the ways that you kept perpetuating shame in your own
Same.
life. You
Yes.
you were you were mirrored that in your programming. You had received all of the outside, but what happens is then we mirror what our programming is and we do it to ourselves. And so when we can stop being the punisher and the abuser to ourselves, that's when all of the stuff that's noise around us no longer has its power.
Hmm.
And so it really sounds like when you finally leaned into this space to go, wow, I'm going to sit with this part of myself that rightfully so has a lot of anger because of what you've been through. Like that would be a whole other podcast just talking about all the details of what you've been through. Like that's the part of me that's going, how many times have people been taught that anger is bad? And we
Oh,
have these belief systems that go, oh, you're a bad person if you even swear, right? And so you're like, part of you is like coming into this space of going, I've got to write, like, let all this stuff bubble up from the repression, the repressed anger, the repressed part of never having a voice, the repressed part of being told I was this, this, and this. And it's got to have an outlet. And so when you can sit with the swearing sailor inside of yourself and
you
go,
know,
I
This is
love and
so funny.
approve of you.
You
Like,
know
I
what's
love and
super
approve of
funny?
you.
It's what's super funny is, and I want to address this for a minute, is that do you want to know what anger really looks like? And anger is outbursts. I could cite so many experiences over especially the last 6 years
Mm-hmm.
where my kids would be like, who is this person?
Mm-hmm.
I would have these outbursts, and then of course I then the shame cycle would start again,
Mm-hmm.
rather than recognizing that that was all trauma based. Years upon years upon
Mm-hmm.
years you talk about with that suppression and know where to actually let it go.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it would look like. It would look like going inward and all of a sudden being very quiet. It
Mm-hmm.
would look like laying on the floor crying.
Mm-hmm.
And that anger took on very different identities for quite a while until I was actually able to recognize it for what it was.
Mm-hmm.
For a period of time, I actually thought I was going crazy because I didn't know at the time, as I was like trying to figure all of this out. Plus, I'm trying to manage relationships with my kids and things that were coming at me from all angles as I was, going through my divorce, leaving the church. All of this was happening all at one time. Some of it was things I caused, other parts of it were placed upon me that I didn't want.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember just over these years, and that's the other thing that people need to recognize is that anger comes in stages. You don't just
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden have an outburst or one awakening and then it's over. It
Mm-hmm.
happens multiple upon multiple times as you layer down.
Yeah.
And as I would unpeel one layer, I would gain a sense of confidence and I felt more centered, and then my body and my own subconscious would be ready for something else, or
Mm-hmm.
something would trigger it, and I had to work through that again, and then anger looked different this time, or
Mm-hmm.
hurt or pain or sorrow looked different.
Yeah.
But to outside people experiencing this with me, it was frustrating for them. It
Mm-hmm.
was frustrating as they watched me melt down,
Yeah.
and they watched me seemingly think that their mom always had, or my friends or my family always thought I had it together. My own self thought I kept it together, and I'm not.
Yeah.
And that's actually where I learned to really love myself, was
Mm-hmm.
actually giving myself permission to have all of these moments and say that it's okay, and
Mm-hmm.
have them multiple times.
Yes. And that's a huge gift that when we recognize, okay, the way that we're creating and perpetuating these programs for ourselves, and finally, disconnect and go, okay, I'm going to shift the way I'm thinking, but then also you lean into saying, I get to give myself full permission to feel all of it,
All of it.
because that's what we're so conditioned. It's kind of like a level of toxic positivity and programming where it's just like you always got to have a smile on your face and let's find the lesson, and everything's, we're just going to have better, more faith into a greater outcome someday, right? And I just feel like living that life is so exhausting because as many people as I work
100%.
with, they are literally so drained energetically. It's that
Mhm.
hamster wheel, is they're constantly just trying to keep up this persona
Mm.
of being perfect, or being the, let's just make sure we're always appearing as we've got our hair combed perfectly, we're dotting the i's, crossing the t's, and we just have such a good positive attitude. And that's something too that I would notice in maybe structures like a group full of women that would get together and speak. They were like spouting out all of these textbook answers of things that weren't real. Like I'm thinking, what I do for a living, and then watching everyone just show up as if their lives are picture perfect. And I'm going, you guys, you're not even being real with each other. And then when you show up in these constructs in social settings, everyone thinks, oh, everyone's life's so perfect. I have to keep it an even deeper secret, you know, that I feel angry at times, and there's really hard things going on with my marriage, or maybe I am questioning this or that. And it's something that just gets swallowed down, swallowed down, swallowed down, and eventually it's going to come out. It's going to
It's
come
gonna
out.
come to a head.
It's going to come out in your physical body. It's going to come out like somehow, some way. It tends to manifest itself, and eventually you have to face the dragon. You have to face
Yeah.
that part that's hidden all the dark corners. And so, especially people who are in high demand experiences, whether it's demand religion, workplaces, relationships where they may be in a narcissistic relationship, they might be experiencing emotional abuse. That's what happens. That part of their authenticity is just squished, 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 squished. And then eventually there comes that breaking point of where they're getting sick. They're not functioning. And eventually it has to come to a space where you have to go, okay, I have to have an outlet. I have to
But
get
you
this
know
out.
what's so interesting though, Cynthia, is that we're conditioned. For me, I didn't know how to
Mm-mm.
recognize those things. Everything that I did was for the benefit of somebody else,
Mm-hmm.
some other thing, whether in, and rightfully so, obviously at times with my children. But if I could go back and recognize things again, I would have set a better example of taking better care of myself,
Mm-hmm.
recognizing that by taking care of my mental, my physical, my emotional, my spiritual, that I was actually giving that gift, to my family.
Mm-hmm.
So when you talk about all of a sudden it all comes to a head, when it comes to a head, that's what happened to me is I didn't know how to take care of myself.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody asks, like how, sometimes when somebody wants to reach out and help you and they say, what can I do to help you? The real honest answer
Yeah.
was, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't even know what I need. I
Yeah.
know that I am in so much pain and turmoil, but I really don't even know what I need. And it wasn't until kind of like what we talked about earlier, where I had to sit and really recognize what was happening and some of the life that I had lived. And a lot of my married life was kept in secret and for very good reasons at the time that I thought. And so I suppressed so many things. I didn't know how to take care of myself. It was always worrying about somebody else. And what's interesting is this part of my um, process of, and I always go back to this experience that I had with a counselor one time, that I always thought that I had to stay in a situation where it was not serving me well. And I remember one time a counselor said to me, has anybody ever asked about you before? Like he had the wisdom and to ask me. And I remember sitting there one day and I was like, no. Oh my gosh, in all of these years and in all of my experiences and certain things, no one has ever once asked me if I was okay.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, I had never asked my own self if I was okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a part of us learning to, um, when we kind of put ourselves, like we talk about Humpty Dumpty, how he sits on a wall and as he's had a great fall. And they always say all the king's horses and all the king's men, horsemen couldn't put Humpty together again. It's because he had to do it himself. So
Mm-hmm.
here's, all of this going on around me. And then all of a sudden someone asks me a question and I was like, oh my gosh, I exist. Oh my gosh, if I don't want to stay in this, I actually don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
Wait a minute, this isn't serving me well. And that helped me to recognize like little tiny, I have memories and glimpses of things that were very crucial in my life that gave me permission
Mm-hmm.
to do something different than I had always done. And then the more that I did that, the more of the onion that kind of those layers began to peel.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, as those layers peeled, they became very potent.
Mm-hmm.
It was strong and it
Yeah.
was hard. And to this day, as I still, it's a lifelong process
Mm-hmm.
to be able to um, recognize and learn about ourselves. But I have learned that there's a tremendous amount of joy in that journey. Instead of fighting it, I now embrace it.
Mm-hmm.
And and the more that I embraced of what is, just what is, and the more I found joy. It doesn't mean that I don't make, wrong choices still in the eyes of someone else. It doesn't mean that I still don't have patterns like we talked that I need to
Mm-hmm.
still work on. But I learned to accept myself and love myself for exactly who I was showing up for. And the moment that I allowed that, the deeper love I started to feel for my own self. And then that exuberated into others.
Yeah.
And I felt like I had more to offer, but I had more to offer authentically
Mm-hmm.
without thinking that I needed to have a right answer for something or that there was an end result that I needed, because there was no longer an organization that I had to report to. There was
Mm-hmm.
no longer anything. I was getting to love another person or love myself because I wanted to.
Yeah. And I guess how I would explain that is the true reclamation of self-love. That is the true journey, right? Is going into that space of inward work and being okay with all the dark and the light. And when we truly, right, it came through your journey of finally going, when someone asks you what you need help with, you're like, I have no idea. To
Yeah.
finally come into this space of going, what do I need? And what parts of Tammy do I get to go back? This is some of the greatest honoring work that I ever do with my clients is being able to go back hand in hand with my clients and be able to help them go and heal these parts of themselves that all they ever needed, all they ever truly desired was the unconditional love, to be seen, to be heard, to be validated, and to have permission to live in that authentic truth. And as you've let go of shame as a root of your foundation, completely
Mm-hmm.
plucked that out of your weed system and gone through the mess that it is to go out and weed your garden because it's not fun. Um, but as you've done that, you're starting to see the new soil that comes in. You're starting to actually decide, wow, what seeds do I want to plant? How do
Mm-hmm.
I want to pull all of this together to create my authentic truth? And watering that with self-love is such a different formula than the way that you were taught. And so like I look at the journey and I think, wow, it's so beautiful. And the beauty comes in looking at the light and the dark. And this is going to be very, very important because we think that the work always has to be light.
Mm-hmm.
But
When
when we
that
can,
we need the dark. They
yes.
actually need each other.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually one cannot exist without the other.
Correct. Correct.
And it is actually crucial. And you were talking about permissions, and that's something that, again, was I had to undo my thought process of permissions. And
Yeah.
that the only person that I needed that permission from was me.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, it was like, well, I give myself permission for everything, really.
Yeah.
Like I had to, and I still to this day, like I've learned to be very verbal. Instead of keeping things inside, I'm like, you know what? I'm feeling shame in this moment. Ooh, I don't want, like, because it's still
Mm-hmm.
a natural human reaction and it's still something that I sat with most of my life. And so I now recognize it and I'll say to myself things like, ooh, I feel shame for, oh, Tammy, why are you feeling shame? Do you really need to feel shame over this? Of course you don't. This is not something to be shameful for. And then I talk myself through dialogues that I have now recognized that because I have an honoring and a respect, and I remember what it feels like to like love myself,
Mhm.
that I'm okay giving myself permission for all of it. And then I'm okay self dialoguing and
Mhm.
recognizing. And the quicker when emotions come, that I
Mhm.
recognize it, give myself permission. I feel it. I see if it's valid. If not, I let it go and I move on in life. And I've learned to kind of just quickly move more through those. When I first was like deconstructing myself or like didn't even know what was going on, it took me forever to identify something.
Mhm.
I couldn't even tell you what it was I was feeling. I didn't know.
Mhm.
And now I'm like, oh, I'm feeling sad in this moment, or I'm feeling anxious. And then I can quickly move through why I'm feeling a certain way. And then I'm like, okay, I need to give a voice to this. I'm feeling anxious in this moment, or I'm angry over this. I
Mhm.
can say it, I can move it, I can sit with it for a second, and then I can move forward.
Yeah.
And then I can decide what I'm going to do with it. And that, I think, is the outcome of putting in the work of giving myself the permission to love myself no matter where I was at, what I was doing. And so I just feel like that too many times we place those confinements on ourselves, or actually we allow ourselves to be influenced by having to have permission from somebody else,
And ultimately, the permission comes from
from our own self.
within.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do that, it's life changing. And having the know-how and the way to do that isn't always pretty. It's not always an easy experience in that process, but it really is so incredibly powerful. And when you can come back into that reclamation of self-love, then you truly tap into that core essence of what love really is, right? It is that infinite source that we're all plugged into. And then do we have the ability to love others without condition even?
Mm-hmm.
That's when we look at our life experiences and we can give people grace.
Yeah,
I mean, yes, we have to have boundaries. We have to know when there's toxic relationships, all of that stuff. Those are other podcast episodes because those are important. That's a
yeah.
part of self-love, is having boundaries, is having self-respect. But we're able to come to a different level of love because when you're full of an infinite well that's overflowing, that it's always there, you don't necessarily have to go outside it yourself to know that you are full of love. Then the relationships that you have around you become just little bonuses, just
Well, and
little
I feel
bonuses to
safe
life. Yeah.
within myself now.
Mm-hmm.
I feel safe, and I recognize circumstances where I don't feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas before, I didn't know how to feel. That's
Mm-hmm.
probably one of the biggest things that I can say has happened to me is I learned how to feel.
Mm-hmm.
I learned how to center myself and understand my own feeling system.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was able to do that, that's actually what connected me more to others. Was I could feel, I actually learned just how empathetic I was,
Mm-hmm.
and I could feel what others were feeling, and it just my deep love for them and my concern and my care deepened.
Yeah.
But I also learned how to also recognize that it was theirs to own
Mm-hmm.
and not take it on, because too many times we take that on, and I recognize that that's also not healthy, and
Mm-hmm.
that we can empathize and love and support someone through whatever it is they're going through as a cheerleader and as the support system, but that they still get to own it
Yeah, and
because it's
that's where
theirs.
boundaries are so
And
important.
that's your boundaries.
Hmm.
Exactly.
And beforehand, there weren't boundaries,
Right.
and it was always extending outside of yourself, making sure everyone else was happy, and then self-neglect, right, which then becomes self-hatred, and it's just the tumbleweed. And so then when you can undo that, which goes into the full aspect of the toxic masculine, toxic feminine
Feminine. Mm-hmm.
aspects, is we move out of self-sacrifice and we reclaim it. Like I said, it's the reclamation of self-love, and we ground ourselves in that pure deliciousness. And that's where we're integrating through the Aquarian age. Like, this is my passion, is integrating that divine feminine that has been so shut out of our society for thousands of years, and really coming in and taking this energy of pure unconditional love and grounding in that energy, that we start to dissolve so many of these structures that have been built upon shame and fear and manipulation. And we really come back into center, and we start to govern self. And then we get to make this beautiful dance happen between the feminine and masculine. And
Mm-hmm.
like I said, that's could definitely be an hour
Oh,
topic in
yeah.
itself.
Because I feel like the feminine and the masculine exist in each one of us. You
Yes,
know what I
it's
mean?
it's a
And
it's a union.
it is absolutely a union, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a very important union
Mm-hmm.
to be able to recognize. And I think that as we recognize um, the healthy side of both of them, I think
Mm-hmm.
that's actually something that helps us to feel centered, because we all of a sudden, I have like a respect for that masculine energy and that feminine energy that
Yes.
intertwine together.
Yes. Which that brings us back, right, to our piano lessons, brings us back to structure, but it
Yep.
also
And
brings in the,
creativity.
yes, but it also dances with
Yep.
creativity. And how is it that we're able to dance the
And
both
do
of them
both.
together
Yes. It's such a
without,
beautiful analogy.
it really is. And I love how we started out with that, and we're going to kind of close up in that analogy as well, because that starts to allow us to be able to blossom into who we truly are, our authenticity, our creative gifts, but also those parts of ourselves that need to have structure, need to have order, and we're really able to truly listen to self, right? And that's a huge gift. I feel like, just by listening to your story, um, I mean, there's so many more stories. I'm like, wow, like when you haven't talked to your friend in a while.
I know. And you just like
Like,
want to sit and catch up, and you're
I know,
like,
I was
oh,
like, okay, there are just certain people that I'm like, I can have the 6 to 8 hour conversations with, and we could definitely keep going. Like, there's so many more corners and aspects to what this is. And so maybe we'll just keep it out there. Who knows? Maybe this isn't the only time you're going to see Tammy. We might have more to talk about in the future, but my goodness, like, this episode is one that has so many golden nuggets. Like, the whole time, it's just like this. Once you hit the deconstruction, it's kind of the unraveling, and then it's the rebuilding of that foundation. And then through those steps that you took to reevaluate, repattern your life, you have stepped into the reclamation of self-love. And as you've stepped into that self-reclamation of owning your authenticity, your own authority, your own ability to listen to your inner compass, now you're able to truly allow that love to extend outward.
it's so true. It
Yeah.
reminds me of like redecorating or like reminds me of like a home that's been burned.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And that you're rebuilding. You're on the same lot, but
Mm-hmm.
and you're rebuilding, and you now are picking everything from the bones. You're
Yes.
picking, you're even moving and shifting walls, and by the time that it's built and it's yours,
Yeah.
and it's like, oh my gosh, I remember this. I remember this is what I wanted, and I'm so grateful.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually look at everything that I've gone through, and like I said, there's so many parts that I still keep so private, but I look at it with gratitude.
Yeah.
I really do. I can't always say that I felt that way. I
Mm-hmm.
can't always say that I felt gratitude in those moments, but hindsight really is 2020. And I can look back
Mm-hmm.
now, and in my current self, I can look and say, I'm so thankful because for people that I have shared some of the deep things with, including my own children, I believe that it's given them the necessary permissions almost for themselves to give themselves permission to search and to look and to say, oh, it's okay for me to have things look different. And so it kind of goes back to that. There's a quote by Marianne Williamson where she talks about light and who are we not to be beautiful and to, because as we come within ourselves in love, we like subconsciously give others permission to do the same within their own lives.
Beautiful.
It is beautiful. So thank you.
Yeah. Oh,
Like,
thank
I
you. I think
so
that's,
appreciate you.
yeah, I think this is like the perfect way to like close off with that is that quote because it is really in living in the authentic space. It's we're reversing the order of the way we've been taught. We
Yeah,
have to go back to self. And it's not prideful, it's not something that's a negative. This is so life-saving. It's
oh my gosh, that's a beautiful way to put
life-saving.
it.
And when you can plug right back into your core essence, like reclaiming that part of you, your supply is limited, and you can show up in the world. And the old formula didn't work. So thank you for showing our audience that it is possible because you truly have risen above so many things. And so it is possible. And through those dark times, through those dark night of the souls, um, it feels so hopeless. And so if there is a listener out there that is feeling like they are going through something where they just can't even see
See,
that
yeah,
end, just hold on
hold on.
and come into this space of really tuning in to that darkness and listen and re-listen to these many tools that we've shared throughout the entire podcast to come back into that space of truly claiming your worth, your value, and eliminating shame.
Yeah. And I would even add to hold still. So
Yeah.
many times we want to fight or flight, but
Yes.
hold still
Yes.
because there will come some, I promise peace does come. Just hold still.
Yes. Wow. Beautiful. Well, let's end it right there.
I
And
love you.
yes, thank you so much. And thanks to all of our viewers, our audience. And wow, this is going to be one that's going to need to be re-listened to over and over and over. So many golden nuggets. So thank you so much.
You are welcome. Have a great night.
Yes, you too. Thank you for listening to the Discover Divinity podcast. If this podcast resonates with you, I invite you to check out discoveringdivinity.com. You will find resources to reclaim your sacred sovereign spirituality. Here, you can join the Discover Divinity community, where we have free online community classes, as well as done for you courses and programs. Navigating the unique personal path to wholeness can feel overwhelming at times. If you would like further support or are ready to take your healing empowerment to the next level, I offer one-on-one intuitive sessions in a variety of different packages where we will discover, release, create, reclaim. Discover your innate wisdom that lies within. Release the imbalances that prevent you from living your truth. Create harmony in body, heart, mind, spirit, energy, and relationships. Reclaim your sovereign soul. It is time to discover new possibilities. It is time to discover you.